Hi everybody, it's Alan Beebe here at TrueAiki.com again. We're in the studio and I'm going to do what I told you I was going to do. I'm going to do a quick once over of the Aikis again, and then also I'm going to talk a little bit about Kokyu. Before I begin, let me point out that this isn't my model. I didn't come up with this, all right? I'm just relaying what somebody else, how they laid it out as a model, and they borrowed from somebody else as well. The model that I use in my head is a little more simple than this. And as far as the three Aikis are concerned, once again, that's not my model. What I noticed was that usage by Ueshiba in his writings. He wrote about Aiki in three main ways. And so it's kind of a mistake to say, well, Alan's three Aikis and his idea of this or that. I wish I could take credit for that, but I can't. It's not my deal. All right, so let's take a look at this cosmology again. So behind me I have posted here, starting with Mu, then Ichirei, Niki, Sangen, Shikon, Hachiriki. And these are just numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. All right. We start with Mu, or Wu. It's the Tao that can't be spoken of. It's ineffable. Even to say Mu is probably a mistake, but we're human beings, so we say something. Then it goes to Ichirei. That's one spirit. And this can be depicted in this manner. Ichirei. It is a singularity. It is unified, non-differentiation. It is, you could say, God. In Shingon they would say Dainichi Nyorai. Those are how we describe, the singularity, non-differentiated. How do we do that? We differentiate it. So as soon as you open your mouth, you end up outside of here. Right. Then you have Ni-ki, two forces or two keys. And this is the one of the oldest representations. This is this is from China. And this side represents water and fire. Sorry, this side is fire and this side is water. You can see there's water in the fire and there's fire in the water. If you didn't have one, you couldn't have the other. And this gets to the idea of interpenetration, where in Buddhism we talk about Indra's net, and that's where you have this net, kind of a grid, and at each node connection of the net there is a jewel. It's a perfect jewel that reflects, and it reflects all the other jewels. And so what you end up with is that each individual has the whole, and the whole has each individual. Okay, so that is that, and you can see the beginning of the Niki, this polar relationship. Then we end up with this thing sort of happening. So you can see again, here's the fire, here's the water, and they're starting to swirl, and this is considered to be the Wuji. So we have the greater Wuji, we have the undifferentiated middle Wuji, one's giving rise to the other. There's a commonality also in when Ueshiba would give his lectures, he would have circle and make a dot, just like we had on that last paper, and say that's the origin, and then it would swirl out like this in this kotodama progression, but if you follow it, it has the same sort of a shape, and we get the idea that this is the universe, but this is also ourselves. So back to that idea of interpenetration. One is a macrocosmic, microcosmic, one is a reflection of the other. Okay, and then finally you get to this here guy, and by the way, this, if we look at this, you see, yeah, this gives us to Sangen, because there's this third entity here, isn't there? Okay, and so that's so we have heaven, earth, and man, which is, again, supposedly, it's very human-centric, but we're a reflection of the greater thing, and these are unified within us. And if you read any of Ueshiba's writings and other people's writings, that, you know, it's kind of all about that. Okay, so I'm going to go back to here again. This is a more common symbol, and we have fire and water again. They're interpenetrating again. Where'd that circle go? Well, it's this. This is the high bridge of heaven right here. Okay, that's kind of where we exist, or you could say this is where we exist. They're interpenetrating, so it goes in and out. It just depends on your perspective. You know what you're referring to. People get into big arguments about the thing. People get into arguments about the names and the colors and everything like that. But whoop-de-doo, right? If you have the time to do that, that's fine. I like to think of this as three-dimensional now at this point, because one is swirling out and then coming and then giving rise to the other and swirling out like that. Okay, Shikon is, so we had fire and water, right? And now we have, now we have heaven and earth. And so you have two planes, and then this gives rise to Hachiriki, the eight different powers. Okay, that's all swell, but what does that mean to us? I'll just point this out. You know, Ueshiba would give these lectures, and the people he was lecturing are not stupid. I'm sure there were some stupid people in there. There always is, right? But they would understand. They would be able to read these characters. These are not, extraordinary characters, and these are not extraordinary ideas. And so they would understand, at face value what this is. And they would recognize that, gee, yeah, he's talking about some cosmology. But the big question is so what, right? So, the old guys up there lecturing about this stuff, and somehow, one way or another, it relates to the practice, the physical practice that we're doing, but I'm not exactly sure how. Well, I want to tell you what he meant when he did this, okay? That brings us to our Aikis again. Now, Aiki number 1, I'm going to use this as a metaphor. We have this tissue, we have this outer skin, and it can be brought into tension. And it becomes very good at dissipating force when it comes into it. The greater tension, the greater ability it has to dissipate the force all over. In other words, you can kind of see here that I can deform this. It doesn't have enough tension that the amount of force of my finger can deform it. All right? We would like it to be strong enough that my finger, it equals the force of my finger, and consequently my finger feels like, gee, I'm not getting any force in, and all I have is my force coming back to me, and that's Yamabiko, the mountain echo. That force echoes back to you. Okay, now I'm going to relate that to Kokyu and Kokyu Ryoku. All right, so Kokyu is breath, as you know, and breath is constituted of inhalation and exhalation. So you have Niki within Kokyu. So Kokyu is like Ichire, and the inhalation and the exhalation are like Niki. And it's all controlled, of course, by our consciousness, whether it be unconsciousness or conscious consciousness. And there's where the human, man, comes in. Again, we get this interpenetration thing. So imagine this is filled with air, and the air is trying to expand, and the skin is trying to contract. Well, you have this yin-yang kind of relationship going on there. Within the air itself, there's yin-yang. Within the tissue of the skin itself, there's yin-yang as well. In other words, it is expanding, but it's trying to contract. So you have that going on as well. That makes things difficult to talk about, but that's the way things are, so we just have to work around that. This is important for our next two Aikis. And it's also obviously fundamental to Aiki number 1. So Aiki 1 and Aiki 2 and Aiki 3 are the phenomena. Kokyu Ryoku facilitates that phenomena. So if I were to pump more air into this ball and the skin was strong enough, it would expand, and then the skin would have to contain that. It would come under more tension. Now, we happen to be smart balls. So when we pump more air, when we apply tension to this, then over time, the skin of our ball adapts and becomes stronger. It's able to stretch, but it's also very, very strong about the stretching because it knows that this is happening to it. All right. So when we work our Kokyu yoku, when we're doing Kokyu dosa, when we're doing breath exercise, we generally work two things. We work the pump, and then we also work the skin. The skin is necessary to work the pump. If I'm pumping into nothingness, the pump isn't going to get stronger. The skin is dependent on the pump, because if there's no pump to put pressure and tension on the skin isn't going to get any stronger. So there again, you have this yin-yang kind of relationship going on. So that's why we do the breath exercises. Now, interestingly enough, it is not completely dependent on the breath. All right? In other words, we learn to be able to expand this out and have tension in this so that it doesn't deform, okay? And yet it doesn't have to be completely breath dependent in order to do that. So you can have Kokyu yoku without having to go su haku all the time. Okay. In fact, if you're going to be able to use this expeditiously, you need to be able to separate those two. But for training and conditioning, that is a powerful method of training the tissue. Okay. And usually the exercises are divided into kind of two camps. One camp is to train the pump, and the other camp is to train the tissue. Now, there are other ways to train the tissue as well. If I push on the tissue, the pressure increases, then you're going to adaptation. If I twist the tissue, pressure increases, you get adaptation. So oftentimes when we do Kokyu dosa, then we combine those two. All right. And for those of you who think of Kokyu dosa as a exercise where somebody's grabbing you and you're throwing them over, you can see by this definition that has really nothing to do with that. That's just kind of a byproduct. And it's a tangent that you can get lost on really quite easily. In fact, most people have gotten completely lost on that, such that the very term that everybody understands and knows is misconceived. All right, so there's your Kokyu yoku. Okay. Now let's talk about Aikido. All right. If this were not, okay, so this is three-dimensional. It's rotating, all right? It's going to rotate. It's rotating on a singular plane, all right? That is what defines it as Aikido. Some people use the model of yin and yang like this, okay? There's a lot of interpenetration again going on here, all right? There's the stiffness of this that has yin and yang. There's this, we just got done talking about this that has yin and yang in it. This on the ground is communicating a force that's going this way that supports this. This has solidity in it just like this does, but it's also, and this has gravity in it just like this does. This one has gravity acting upon it, supposedly balanced in my model here, and this one's going this way. In order to be a balance, it's reliant upon both. on top of that, we have a force going this way. If there was only this, it would go like this, right? But in this model, we have a force going this way on this side of the fulcrum and a force going this way on this side of the fulcrum, and it defines the balance of the thing. Okay, that's an okay model. I think a more useful model is this one, and here's why. If I have a model like this, and you could see it's forming a tangent on top of here. So with this kind of a model, if I put mass on this side and I want to equal it out, I have to put an equal amount of mass on this side. Well, as human beings, we just don't gain mass that quickly. I've gained mass, but not that quickly. All right, so how do we deal with this? Okay, well, they put mass. How do we, on this side, how do we balance that out? That's the whole thing, right? This can rotate on a singular plane such that it balances out, and that's how you get that kind of scale, that the hanging scale that they would use in Asia. So you'd put your thing over here, and you'd have your little measurements that come out, and you just move it out until it's balanced, and you say, okay, it's this much. I think that's a better model, although I initially conceived of this model, but relating to what we're doing, I think this is a better model. Anyway, Aikido. Now, let me point out something. This working is entirely dependent upon this not going like that, right? And this not deforming. I just showed you that if I push on it, it'll deform. So if I put enough mass on this thing, this deforms now, and it's not balancing anything anymore. Okay? That's where the Kokyu Yoku, the importance of Kokyu Yoku comes in. The stronger I can make this, the more non-resistant, it's kind of an interesting paradox. The stronger I can make this, the more non-resistance I can have to a force that's coming in. So this comes in like this is moving, and boom, we have this resultant force vector. All right? Well, I'll go ahead and get to Aikido 3. So Aikido 3 is this same thing. It's rotating on this plane, and then I cut it in half, and I have it rotating on this plane. All right? Or I can have it rotating on this plane, and I can have it rotating on this plane. There we go. Sorry. That way I get my fire and water and my heaven and earth. That's a shikon. I have rotation, this interpenetrating rotation on 2 different planes, and that covers the whole thing. So whenever a linear, if I could do this, okay, a linear force comes in, it's going to be met orthogonally. All right? If the Kokyu Ryoku is strong enough. Okay? So now you can see, it's the teeter-totter is only as strong as this thingy and the fulcrum. Now, this thingy and a human being is part of us, and we are the fulcrum. Okay? I can get back to Kokyu Doku later and how to develop and everything, where it involves our tissue very, very much. And also it involves the air. We have pneumatic pressure inside of ourselves. Okay? All of our tissue is connected to that. Many of us aren't aware of that, but we can, at a different time, we can go over that and you'll become aware of it. And then you can train that, and this could be stronger. So then not only this is part of this, right? everything becomes stronger, so consequently everything has the capacity to be non-resistant when encountering greater forces. Okay, now let's go back before I quit to this thing. It's a really big thing, and I think a lot of people miss it because it seems very abstract. All right, again, we got a force coming this way, you got a force coming this way, they meet at 90 degrees. All right, this force doesn't impede this force doesn't impede this force, they feel each other. Okay, and there's this resultant force vector. There is no resistance. It's the very definition of Aikido that a lot of people like to tout. All right, but they feel resistance while they're doing it, right? They're going blah, 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 blah. Now come here and either do what I say because I tell you to, and now look, there's non-resistance, right? Or do what I say because if you don't, I'm going to, bust your head or crank you or something like this. And there's a lot of resistance involved in that, all right? When you're talking about non-resistance, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. The better you get at this, the stronger you get, the more force that you can non-resist, the more powerful you become. And my teacher, Shirata Sensei, said, you should be working to get to the point where whenever you're doing anything, you're kind of going, you're just like barely doing anything, because if you do anything, the bones and tissue are going to fly off and there's going to be mayhem. Until you get to that point, you haven't arrived at a martial level that you need to be. And if you've ever encountered, this wouldn't be me, but if you've ever encountered people who are reaching that level or at that level, they are actively dirtying themselves up, restraining themselves from exhibiting the kind of power that they have, because we can't take it. We would just blow apart, right? And that having been said, I hope you will consider, it relates to what Ueshiba said on his first thing, one strike can kill in Aikido. If you've encountered one of these people that has that tremendous amount of power, it isn't like, if I punch you here, you'll die. It's not like that. It's that I can release the kind of force that if it goes into you, you cannot dissipate it, and it will be dissipated in your body and organs will explode. That's the kind of force that Ueshiba was talking about. So this thing is super duper important, okay? Yes. So I invite you to go ahead, think about this, figure this out, steal this secret, right? That's been an open secret for a long time and is still just kind of lying dormant. All right, and I will keep throwing things out there, and we will progress together. Thank you for joining me here today, and we'll talk more again next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.